Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present. Can you all hear me well? I'm talking without microphone at the moment, or without headphones, so hopefully it will still come around. Yes, okay, thank you then. So I would like to talk about a few things in cities that we can do to reduce the air pollution emissions and exposures that, and show you some of the work what we're conducting at the moment. As many of you may know, that cities are currently, kind of hotspots of air pollution. I think it's important to realize that there's a lot of variability in air pollution. And we get these hotspots in cities. Like here is a map for PM2.5. It's a bit of an older map, but it's still valid. And what we can see is that some cities have much higher levels than others. So here the darker dots, northern Italy, Poland, and kind of Czech Republic. There are a number of cities that have fairly high air pollution levels for PM2.5 and lower for others. If we look at NO2, the map looks a bit different because NO2 has different sources. NO2 particularly comes from traffic as kind of a main source, while for PM2.5 we see other sources like residential heating and other sources, agriculture, that I'll come back to later. But here what we see for NO2, the distribution is a bit different. We see cities like in Belgium, the Netherlands, northern Italy again, but also like Barcelona, Madrid, that have fairly high air pollution levels. We did this health impact assessment earlier this year. It was published earlier this year, and we estimated that if we would reduce air pollution levels to the lowest level measured in one of the cities, we focused on 1,000 cities in this case, we could prevent 125,000 deaths for PM2.5 and 80,000 deaths for NO2. So as you can see, there's a fairly large mortality burden related to the air pollution in cities. This is about a third of the population, EU population, that lives in this nearly 1,000 cities. So what I said, one of the main sources within cities what we see is traffic, particularly motorized traffic. Currently our urban and transport planning is suboptimal, and we can actually be improved. So I'll talk about a few issues related to that and what we can do about it. First, I want to be clear that we talk about air pollution, but air pollution comes from somewhere. That's what I said. Most of the time, it's related to how we design our cities and how people get around. So, for example, my general kind of what I'm talking about is that if you design a city, say for cars, you get a lot of people to use the cars. That leads to air pollution, but not only air pollution, we have also other exposures like noise, heat island effects, because of there is more road network needed for cars. Also leads to more stress, less social context, less physical activity, and that leads to adverse health effects and premature mortality. On the other side, for example, if you take, have people cycling around, if you get more cycling infrastructure, you get more people cycling, it's less air pollution, but also other exposures, that I mentioned. I focus here on air pollution, but you have to know that most of the time we have the same sources for the other exposures as well, like noise, heat island effects, and physical activity. For cycling, people get more physical activity, so it's good in a way. That I'll come back to this later. Now, also what we've seen during the Corona lockdowns, what we've seen last year, in particular the severe lockdowns, is a reduction in air pollution levels. It was quite remarkable. Partly this was because different cities took different measures to reduce air pollution or to stop people moving around, what reduces the air pollution. But they also want to keep these measures going after the lockdown. Like here in Paris, London says they're going to be making lots of a number of car-free areas. Also Milan, they want to introduce more cycling schemes. And all these measures actually help to reduce air pollution levels. So, we have it a little bit taste of what can be done actually to reduce air pollution levels. And actually we know that it works, because we've seen like during the lockdowns that like NO2 levels, you know, reduced by about 60 to 70, 80% at times in the different cities. For PM2.5 it was a bit different because of different sources, so the reduction is not as big, it's sometimes only 10 or 20%. So we may have to look to other sources or to use other policy measures, and I'll come back to this later. So I would like to give you some of the solutions that we may have to reducing the air pollution in cities. And first of all, it's a difference in how we use the current the spaces in our city. So we're looking at land use changes. We should reduce car dependency. We move more towards public and active transportation, and also greening actually can help a little as well, although I won't go into details. First of all, that, you know, how do we use currently the space? What we see in many cities is very car dominated. All of you know that cars produce you know, nitrogen dioxide, or produce oxides of nitrogen that turn into nitrogen dioxide, also particulate matter, and often what we see, you know, there are too many cars in the cities. This is one of the reasons for that, because there are roads, so people want to use the roads, and they just happily to drive around. So one thing to think about is try to reduce the space that cars actually can use in other motorized traffic. And so one of the ideas is the Barcelona Superblock. This on the left of the picture, you can see what is the current system in Barcelona. It's a grid system where you've got cars going up and down or left and right. The idea for the Superblock is to cut off 4 junctions in a block of 9, which you see on the right, and then don't allow motorized traffic to go there anymore, but to only have people walking or cycling there, and also put in more green space. So the idea is to get 500 Superblocks in Barcelona. At the moment we've got about 3, we've got still quite a bit to do, but we've been modeling to see what is the effect of introducing, if we would be introducing 500 Superblocks in Barcelona. So this is the third one at the moment. So the top you see what was before, the roads before with cars, etc. At the bottom you see what it's afterwards. So no cars anymore, people walking around. This is taken in the afternoon. People are probably still having their siesta. There are not so many people, but you get the idea. So we estimated that if you would introduce the Superblocks, you know, you would reduce cars by about 20% in the city, because there wouldn't be as much space, and particularly you also would be reducing the NO2 levels. But besides that, there are other benefits as well: reduction of noise, increase in green space and surface temperature. So this has also benefits for health. If you would introduce them, we estimate that you could prevent 700 deaths, premature deaths per year, and almost half of them come through the reduction of NO2. So almost 300 deaths per year could be avoided because the NO2 levels would be reduced by about 24%. But then you can see there are other benefits as well because of the reduction in noise levels, reduction in heat island effects because there's more green, fewer cars, so you get less of a heat island effect. Also because of green spaces you can prevent premature deaths, and also because of an increase in physical activity. This is well underestimated here, but also you can prevent. So you know, you can see most of the benefits will come through the reduction of NO2, but I mean there are also other benefits that you can take into account. In Paris, my understanding is that the mayor wants to go for the 15-minute city, where all the destinations that people need to go to, the work, school, events, cultural events, etc., should be within 50 minutes of the residents. I think this is quite ambitious. I don't see exactly how it can happen, but I think it's something nice to aim for, because you know the idea is that you reduce the commute to your work, for example. Many people commute half an hour, what also leads to emissions and air pollution levels. And in this way, if you live closer, you would have a reduction of the emissions and air pollution levels. But then you also may have other benefits, because you may walk to your work or cycle, what gives you more physical activity, what's very good for health as well. The other thing what may help, particularly to reduce air pollution levels coming from transport, is becoming car-free. Hamburg says they're becoming car-free in 2034. It's mainly for climate crisis reasons, because they want to reduce the CO2 emissions, but this also will reduce the air pollution levels. It's kind of an ambitious target. I don't know if they're going to reduce or make the whole of Hamburg car-free or a large part of it, but it's something to aim for. I mean, health wasn't included kind of as their targets, but of course when you reduce CO2 levels, when you reduce car use, you also reduce air pollution, and the air becomes much cleaner. Not so long ago, with one of my colleagues, we wrote a paper on this. What are the benefits? Again, the benefits are not only for reduction of air pollution, but also for the reduction of noise and getting more space for active transportation, walking and cycling, or green space, and also the reduction of heat island effects that may result as of the reduction of car use. Do you think it's possible? Well, there are already some neighborhoods that are car-free. This is Vauban in Freiburg. It's a large neighborhood in Freiburg, a bit away from the city center. It's a neighborhood with sustainable housing, lots of green space, and no cars are allowed there. It's a wonderful area. Unfortunately, it's a bit too popular. Too many people will live there, so it's also quite expensive. But it shows, that you can use the land in a different way, where you don't allow cars, and that also reduces the air pollution levels. To get to the city center, they need to have take a tram, or they need to take the cycle to the city center, for example. Now, I must say, a lot of cities are actually counting on the cars to reduce air pollution. I mean, we know that the electric car is being introduced. I mean, some cities have set targets that by 2030 there shouldn't be any fossil fuel cars coming into the city anymore, but only electric car. But it's only, of course, part of the solution, because, of course, yes, you reduce NO2 levels. There are no emissions from our local NO2 levels, at least, from electric cars, but you still have particulate matter coming from the wheels and from the brake wear, this kind of things. And also, you replace one type of car by another, so it takes up a lot of space in the city. What we have, for example, here in Barcelone, although only 1 out of 4 trips are by cars, cars take up about 60% of the public space that's available, because roads are also public space. So they take up a disproportionate amount of public space, actually, what in a way could be used in a much better way. Of course, when people sitting in the car, they don't do physical activity, and lack of physical activity is quite a big problem. So we need to get rid of our car dependency and move more to alternative transportation, active or public transportation, or reduce air pollution levels. And this is often possible because many of the car trips, some of the estimate that up to 50% of car trips are actually less than 5 kilometers. So they could be replaced probably not by walking, but certainly by cycling or by using public transport. Cycling has many benefits. We know it reduces premature mortality. It combines transport with the gym. A lot of people don't have enough time to go to the gym. But if they cycle to work, you can use that time period as the gym. Also, it causes less air pollution, less noise pollution, zero CO2 emissions, except for what you eat, of course. Takes up much less public space than the car, so you leave more public space for other things. We also know that cyclists are much happier than car drivers. There's always been some concern that because of accidents, as soon as cyclists get killed, you see it in the newspaper front line, but actually, there's quite a bit of research showing that the benefits of physical activity well outweigh any risk of air pollution or accidents for cyclists in this way by a factor of 60 to 70. So the benefits are much greater than the risk what you actually may have. And of course there are examples of this. I mean, myself, I'm from the Netherlands. I grew up cycling, and you can see cities like Utrecht in the Netherlands where you got many people cycling. I mean, this is in the afternoon, many cyclists, very few cars on the road. And this is a city that actively works towards reducing cars and getting people to cycle. Also what we've seen, I mean, during the pandemic, we've seen more people cycling. There's a couple of nice studies coming out where we see that there are more cycling lanes being put into cities, and that increased the cycling rate quite considerably. So, I mean, I think if you provide cycling infrastructure, you can actually get people to cycle and reduce the air pollution levels. Ourselves, we looked at this in 167 cities in Europe. We looked at the relationship between how much cycling infrastructure was available for people in a city and what percentage of people were cycling. And what we saw in these 167 cities, what covered about 75 million people, we saw almost a linear relationship between how much cycling infrastructure was available per 100,000 people and the percentage mode share of cycling. So up to about 25% mode share, so 1 out of 4 trips cycling, we saw this linear relationship. After that it broke down, probably because other factors become important. But what it shows to me is that you need to have safe cycling infrastructure to get people to cycle, and that's why it's very important to bring this in and change your land use in the city. In this particular cities, we estimate that you could prevent over 10,000 deaths per year if you would increase the cycling mode up to about 25%. But of course there are other measures of reducing air pollution as well. As what I said, one of the things is if you take cars away, you can introduce more green space, so you don't have the source anymore. But of course we know that actually green space also may mitigate the air pollution. I mean, there's some, it doesn't affect to a large extent, but to some. What it also has, what it does is reduce heat island effects. I mentioned before, normally city centers are 3-4 degrees hotter than surrounding areas, so green space can help with this and also reduce noise levels. Furthermore, we know from that green space actually extends life expectancy, it's reduced with fewer mental health problems, we see better cognitive functioning in children and also in the elderly, we see people with better mood, and also we see generally healthier babies. So we are replacing our current roads and parking that's to a large extent used by motorized traffic with green environment can actually change an environment, with high air pollution and that is detrimental to health to something that's beneficial to health. Do you think it's possible? Yes, there are some examples. I mean, this is, for example, Seoul in South Korea. At the left side, you see before they had the big motorway, lots of traffic there, lots of air pollution. They got rid of the motorway and they put in a waterway with green space and just a small road. So, a much nicer environment with much less air pollution levels. And we see it in many cities. At the moment, here in Barcelona, there used to be in Plaza Glorias, there used to be a big roundabout with lots of traffic coming in from outside the city. They have torn it down, and the plan is to put a road underground and put a park on top of it. And this is something what we see in other places. Here another way of looking at space for greening is Alder Hospital in Liverpool. This is a children's hospital. On the left you see what is before. You see a hospital with a park next to it. And they wanted to build a new hospital. They asked the children, what do you want in the new hospital? And the children said, we want to have more park space. We want to have more green. We want to go outside at times. So what they did was the old hospital, they put partly on the ground where the park was before, put green space on top, and then the old hospital became also a larger part, part of the park. So you see more green space, and still they had the hospital. But of course, you need to have also green space closer by, like in your street. This is the Ramblas de Poblenou in Poblenou. This is an area where there's a walkable area that people walk up and down with cycling paths on the sides. Few cars are allowed in, but also with trees. So this is a much nicer environment actually to be, with much lower air pollution levels, and people get also physical activity. Now I've been focusing quite a bit on traffic in that way, but what we see overall is that air pollution levels are going down, partly as a result of the Euro classification. We go with car emissions with Euro 6, and the more new cars we get, the air pollution levels go down. And then we get other sources that become more important, and one of them is, for example, the use of wood stoves. And what we see is, that's actually increasing, and this is taking over as one of the main sources for particulate matter in a number of cities. Now, I'm not talking about cities where you still do some coal burning like in Poland, but I'm talking about cities like perhaps in France, I don't know, but in the Netherlands, the UK, where people think this is nice, we're going to burn, we can get one of these wood stoves. Wood is natural, so it doesn't do any harm. And what I end up is actually putting in quite a bit of air pollution. The particulate matter. That we know now that also PM2.5 coming from this wood stove is a serious threat to health. And some cities now are introducing measures to reduce the air pollution. For example, I just saw in England they were producing that you can't put any coal in there anymore. We know how bad coal is in a way. And also no wet wood. One of the worst things is to do after wood not completely dry, put it in wet, what produces a lot of particulate matter. So this is coming up. The other thing what's coming up in Europe is particulate coming from agriculture. That's also reaching our cities. And agriculture in many areas, in quite a few areas, is a real problem where there are so many emissions. Again, myself coming from the Netherlands, you got more cows than people, I think. And so this is also producing air pollution, and not only air pollution, as you know, also it's contributing quite a bit to CO2 emissions. It leads to warming. So we have a double problem there. At the moment, we're working on a review. This is the protocol submitted to it. What kind of urban policy interventions could reduce actually the emissions and exposure from traffic? We've been looking at a number of things. I don't have any results yet, but what are measures like charging fees to enter the city. I just talked about vehicle restriction. What is one of them? Also the introduction of further regulation like Euro 6, Euro 7, this technology, how it improves, or introducing electric cars. Low emission zones have been quite popular in quite a few cities. And so we're looking at what is the current evidence for this, what do we see, and we're hoping later this year to publish actually. But this gives you some kind of idea what kind of measures are available that, to reduce air pollution levels. I think whatever we do, we have to keep in mind that I think many of us, also you, we're coming from a public health background, and we can't do so much about lowering them. We can say what is bad for health, but something to do about it, often we can't. So we need to talk to urban planners, to transport planners, transport engineers, to work on this, to change our cities. and also change our transport systems. But also other things, other sectors, for example, education. I don't know what it is for you at the moment in Paris, but a lot of people take their kids to school by car, what generates emissions. And we've got programs here now, what we see in Barcelona, where they don't allow parents to take the kids to school or reduce the traffic around schools to actually lower the levels of air pollution, partly because we know that kids are quite susceptible to air pollution, and it reduces their cognitive development. So I think that's quite important there. Quite a bit of this talk what I've done. I've written a review paper earlier, last year. You can read more about this if you're interested in finding out a little bit more. And the other thing is I did a little book that you can get on Amazon, a number of blogs together. What is the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on what's happening in the city, particularly also around air pollution levels, green space, etc. So that gives you a bit of background as well. Many thanks for your interest and listening. If you have any particular questions, I'm happy to take questions.